ASN, TNI, dan Polri. Kemudian juga bagaimana kita tetap selalu menegakkan disiplin penerapan protokol kesehatan COVID-19. Dan hari ini kita secara khusus soal data kependudukan dan data pemilih di dalam Pilkada serentak tahun 2020. Saya kira ini problem klasik, ya. Setiap mau pemilu, setiap mau pilkada, ini selalu menjadi masalah. Kemarin pun juga beberapa anggota termasuk Pak Wahyu menyampaikan soal data, ya, data pemilih ini. Dan saya kira memang salah satu masalahnya karena memang kita belum menyelesaikan secara tuntas masalah administrasi kependudukan kita, ya. Dalam beberapa waktu yang lalu saya juga mengalaminya sendiri, dan saya sampaikan juga kepada Menteri Dalam Negeri pada saat itu, ya. Jadi masalah elektronik KTP ini juga pada saat kita datang ke daerah mungkin di dapil kita, ini juga menjadi masalah. Kemarin saya datang ke Lampung, mereka menyampaikan bahwa sekarang Dukcapil itu selampung tidak menerbitkan suket, ya. Sementara orang yang akan datang ke TPS itu kalau tidak pakai iktp harus pakai suket. Nah, berarti nanti ada masalah ini di TPS nanti itu. Nah, oleh karena itu saya sebetulnya menganggap ini karena penting dan strategis, bukan hanya bicara tentang pilkada serentak, dan ini jangka panjang, ya. Tadinya saya berharap Pak Menteri datang karena ini bicara soal kebijakan yang mudah-mudahan kalau kita punya komitmen yang tinggi, ini harusnya bisa selesai. Ini sekali lagi problem yang klasik dan akut, nggak selesai-selesai ini tiap tahun menjelang pemilu. Nah, tapi sayang Pak Menterinya tiba-tiba memberikan informasi baru tadi pagi 1 jam lalu yang saya dapat informasi dari Sekretariat tidak bisa hadir. Jadi saya minta pendapat dari bapak-bapak dan ibu-ibu. Kalau saya, karena ini sangat penting dan menyangkut policy yang saya kira harus bukan hanya menghadapi pilkada, tetapi juga jangka panjang, sepertinya tidak lengkap, ya, kalau Pak Menterinya tidak hadir. Jadi kalau saya mengusulkan ini kita tunda saja, gitu, ya. Oleh karena itu saya minta pendapat beberapa dari pimpinan atau anggota. Kami persilakan. Silakan Pak Junimat sama Pak Gaus.
Ya, Ketua dan pimpinan serta teman-teman anggota dan para mitra kami yang kami banggakan. Sesungguhnya Ketua, pimpinan dan teman-teman anggota, kita punya MD3. Kita punya tatip. Alhamdulillah puji Tuhan saya periode kedua di DPR. Ya. Kalau di Komisi 3, Ketua, wajib mitra itu hadir secara utuh. Seperti misalnya KPU, harus wajib komisioner hadir semua. Bawaslu juga demikian. Kementerian juga demikian. Kenapa harus begitu? Supaya utuh. Ya, hasilnya utuh. Ya, bisa ke depan juga berjalan utuh. Jadi bertanggung jawab terhadap semua keputusan. Jadi kalau kita begini terus, ya kemarin juga kita RDP, ya, virtual. Sementara kita bolak-balik dari rumah sudah buru-buru. Gitu loh. Yang perlu siapa sekarang? Pemerintah atau DPR? Kan begitu. Satu, kedua, pembatalan jangan tiba-tiba, Pak. Terus terang, kalau Pak Menteri tidak hadir, saya nggak hadir, Pak, hari ini. Nggak hadir saya. Kenapa? Rasa penghargaan saya kepada Menteri. Kan begitu. Komisioner juga demikian. Sebaiknya hadir semua, Pak. Yang dari KPU, yang dari Bawaslu. Ya, jangan begini terus. Jadi saya harap terhitung mulai pagi ini, kita sudah harus mengambil sikap di Komisi 2. Ya, kalau tidak lengkap, maka apa namanya skors atau tunda. Jangan kita bolak-balik begini, Pak. Yang kedua, kita punya kesepakatan, ada tim A, tim B, tim C, nggak jalan, Pak. Ini bagaimana ceritanya? Dianggap hanya kertas biasa saja kita ini. Iya kan? Saya bukan menyinggung tentang ATR. Kita sudah punya komitmen kesepakatan, ada tim ini bekerja untuk sengketa-sengketa masyarakat, tapi nggak jalan tuh. Jalan tuh apa kita ini? Jadi Pak Ketua, pimpinan, kita ambil sikap lah. Bila perlu kita nggak usah sidang lah. Capek kita, Pak, pandemi begini. Iya kan? Pagi-pagi kita sudah gosok minyak kayu putih dari rumah. Nggak datang mitranya, Pak. Kan begitu, capek kita begini, Pak. Ya kita mau ke dapil lagi, Pak. Nanti masyarakat bertanya, bagaimana, Pak? Bagaimana Ketua? Capek kita menghadapi ini. Belum sedang berbagai, Pak. Saya bicara aja sekarang. Tolong KPU, jangan mengangkangi undang-undang, Pak. Tolong, Pak. Ya, putusan pengadilan adalah putusan tertinggi, Pak. Hanya pengadilan yang bisa membatalkan undang-undang, Pak. Tidak bisa PKPU tidak melaksanakan undang-undang. Melanggar hukum namanya, Pak. Jadi jangan dipelesetkan. Kalau di pasal 153 setelah mengatakan dapat, bukan berarti kita arogan mengatakan tidak usah dijalankan karena 30 hari. Tidak boleh begitu, Pak. Saya bukan intervensi, tapi saya tergelitik, Pak. Ya, saya puluhan tahun sekolah hukum, Pak. Boleh kita uji. Kan begitu, kita punya filosofi hukum. Hukum punya nilai, Pak. Ibu Epi bisa duduk kembali jadi komisioner karena putusan pengadilan. Jadi jangan ketika kita, ya, bukan dikalahkan, memang kalah di pengadilan, ya karena ada peluang undang-undang mengatakan dapat, lalu ketua KPU membuat surat, diabaikan saja. Loh, kok gampang banget ini saya pikir. Bapak paham nggak? Ketika ini berjalan, Pak, dan si B menang, yang Bapak mengatakan jalan terus, masuk ke MK, dibatalkan, Pak, kemarannya, Pak. Ini bagaimana? Jadi jangan bikin masalah, Pak. KPU harus ambil sikap, harus patuh pada hukum, harus patuh kepada undang-undang, Pak. Dapat itu bukan berarti langsung bisa tidak, bisa gue punya arogan. Nggak bisa, Pak. Bila perlu KPU, ya kita konsultasi di Komisi 2. Ini bagaimana Komisi 2 pendapatnya? Kan begitu. Belum nanti masalah-masalah KPU yang lain, Pak. Banyak KPU bikin masalah sekarang, Pak. Gitu loh. Ya kan? Di Sumatera Barat, di Ogan Ilir, di Jambi, di mana-mana, Pak. Itu pada digugat di PT UN, Pak. Kalah semua KPU-nya, Pak. Tidak ada KPU yang menang. Saya sebagai anggota Komisi 2 malu saya, Pak. Kenapa? Kita mitra, Pak. Kalau saya di Komisi 3, saya nggak peduli, Pak. Begitu. Kita sering ke dapil kita Indonesia, Pak. Masyarakat bertanya kalau kita turun. Ini bagaimana, Pak? Kenapa KPU-nya begini, Pak? Kan begitu. Kenapa Bawaslu begini, Pak? Ya kan? Kenapa putusan di KPP itu nggak jalan, Pak? Kami sudah laporkan di KPP mengatakan bersalah, tapi KPU tidak mau menjalankan, Pak. Loh, kami jawab apa? Kemarin kita sudah dengar Ketua KPU DPP mengatakan bahwa keputusan mereka itu tidak dieksekusi oleh KPU. Ini bagaimana ceritanya? Habis anggaran kita, Pak. Kan begitu. Belum si rekap tuh, Pak. Saya ikuti IG tuh KPU. KPU aktif, ya, pelatihan si rekap. Iya kan? Pak Oyo kemarin bilang, coklat saja itu bermasalah, Pak. Bagaimana ini coklat nih? Sudah banyak menelan korban nih coklat nih. Jadi hari ini pimpinan, Pak Ketua yang kami hormati, banyak hal yang harus kita kupas tuntas. Kita perlu selesai, Pak. Nah kalau tidak lengkap, kita bicara pembebasan kosong hari ini, Pak. Ya, saran kami dari fraksi PD Perjuangan, Pak, kalau tidak diskors, ditunda, Pak. Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Judimat. Jadi sebetulnya ya selain tema utama yang kita bahas, memang ada hal-hal yang terkait masalah yang kita temui di lapangan, baik itu kepada Kementerian Dalam Negeri, juga dengan KPU dan Bawaslu. Saya minta Pak Gaus, silakan. Begini Pak Gaus. apakah kita tunda temanya, ya, karena di sini kalau dari KPU dan Bawaslu lengkap sebetulnya, ya, tunda temanya atau tunda sidangnya. Nah, konsekuensinya kalau tunda temanya, kita buat tema khusus bicara tentang KPU dan Bawaslu saja, gitu kan? Atau kita tunda rapat ini tema yang sama. Silakan Pak Gaus.
Terima kasih pimpinan. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya Gus Padi Gaus dari fraksi Partai Amanat Nasional menyikapi apa yang disampaikan oleh Ketua dan juga diresponi oleh Pak Junimar Girsang dari fraksi PDI. Saya dapat memahami keluhan dan isi hati yang beliau sampaikan. Saya selalu meminta kepada pimpinan dan kita semua, dan ini pernah kita lakukan. Oleh karena itu, wibawa komisi perlu kita tegakkan. Kalau tadi dikatakan oleh Pak Junimar di Komisi 3, kita mengacunya kepada MD3. Apa yang beliau sampaikan mungkin jadi referensi. Oleh karena itu kita tidak melihat siapanya, tetapi siapa yang kita undang tidak sesuai dengan apa yang kita harapkan. Menurut hemat saya adalah tugas kita untuk menyatakan apakah rapat ini dilanjutkan atau tidak. Dan saya setuju, jadikan ini jadi presiden. Dan dulu pernah juga Menteri Hukum dan HAM, beliau tidak hadir, diwakilkan. Akhirnya kita tolak kehadiran wakil dan kita lakukan rapat berikutnya sesuai kapan. Oleh karena itu, apalagi tadi dikatakan bahwa baru 1 jam berselang baru dinyatakan oleh Pak Mendagri tidak bisa hadir. Oleh karena itu, ke depan saya sangat setuju Ketua, kita dukung karena ini persoalan yang sangat mendesak. Pertama, memang temanya kita tunda saja, tundanya. Dan kehadiran KPU dan Bawaslu menurut hemat saya perlu kita manfaatkan. Karena persoalan-persoalan yang berkaitan dengan pilkada complicated, banyak persoalan yang bisa dibahas tentang hal itu. Kalau memang hal ini disepakati oleh kawan-kawan. Intinya adalah kami dari fraksi Partai Amanat Nasional mendukung apa yang Ketua sampaikan dan juga apa yang disampaikan oleh Pak Junimar dari fraksi PDI. Barangkali demikian. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Pak Wahyu.
Ya Ketua, terima kasih kesempatannya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kami dari fraksi Partai Demokrat mengusulkan agar rapat dilanjutkan rapat fraksi di ruangan masing-masing aja Ketua. Terima kasih Ketua.
Pak Jul.
Saya dukung nih Bang Wahyu pimpinan, Bang Junimat ya kan. Tunda saja rapat itu, udah nggak enak suasana ini kita.
Ya.
Begitu pimpinan.
Ya. Saya minta ada satu yang mewakili virtual. Kalau secara fisik kita semua ada tunda. Pak Cornelis.
Baik Pak, terima kasih. Berhubung rapat ini penting, kita tunggu kapan Pak Mendagri punya waktu. Apakah malam, apakah sore, kita tunggu. Atau Bapak cek ulang kapan kesiapannya. Terima kasih. Baik, saya kira cukup ya.
Kita akan membahas agenda pembicaraan kita hari ini yang berkaitan dengan data kependudukan dan data pemilih Pilkada Senat 2020. Karena ini sangat penting, kita akan menjadwalkan ulang ya rapat kerja kita dengan Menteri Dalam Negeri dan KPU serta Bawaslu. Nah, setuju ya Pak ya? Oke, baik. Dengan mengucapkan alhamdulillahirrabbilalamin, maka rapat ini kita tutup untuk kita cari waktu berikutnya melanjutkan dengan agenda yang sama. salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wassalam.
Salam.
Izin Bapak dari Sekretariat menginfokan untuk tetap standby pada Zoom meeting.
Memutuskan untuk menunda rapat hari ini dikarenakan keterbatasan atau juga ketidakhadiran dari Mendagri, di mana nanti rapat akan dijadwalkan ulang dengan agenda yang sama pemirsa bersama dengan Mendagri, KPU dan Bawaslu. Demikianlah pemirsa, saya Rahmawati melaporkan dari ruang rapat Komisi 2 DPR RI. Terima kasih atas perhatian Anda. Sampai jumpa.
And policy guidance to national parliaments around the world. I believe this effort is critical, especially in the middle of a pandemic like today, where many countries are overwhelmed by the mitigation strategies for fighting against COVID-19. In this unprecedented situation, sorry, I think there's a problem with my video. If you give me 1 second, let me restart the, sorry. Okay, can you see me? Yeah. Yeah. In this unprecedented situation, I believe that SDGs can be our compass to a transformative recovery that reduces the risk of future crises and brings the inclusive and sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, the agenda of 2030 Declaration adopted by all UN member states in 2015. I think the video is, sorry. Let me restart. The agenda of 2030 Declaration adopted by all UN member states in 2015 acknowledges the essential roles of national parliaments through their enactment of legislation and adoption of budgets, and their role in ensuring accountability for the effective implementation of our commitments. It therefore becomes the foundation on the recognition of the leading role of parliaments and parliamentarians as the elected representatives of the people to promote and adopt the people-centered policies and legislation to ensure that no one is left behind. The Indonesian Constitution has mandated that development is the right of everyone, and further stated in the opening of preamble of the Constitution of the Republic of Indonesia as follows: to form a government of the state of Indonesia, which shall protect all people of Indonesia and the land that has been struggled for, and to improve public welfare, to educate the life of people, and to participate toward the establishment of a world order based on freedom, perpetual peace, and social justice. Thus, it is clear that SDGs is not a universal, but also a nationally owned agenda in which countries need to translate the globally defined goals, targets, and indicators into their own national contexts and devise actions to guide their SDGs processes. Participation of local, national, and global stakeholders are therefore needed in order to better mobilize and scale up all resources for achieving all of the goals. To this end, the Committee for Interparliamentary Cooperation, as the focal point of the SDGs in Indonesian Parliament, has been very active in playing a leading role for the SDGs awareness raising to our members of parliaments, ensuring that all goals and targets of the SDGs are taken into account during all legislation processes, and enhancing parliamentary diplomacy for the realization of the SDGs. Ladies and gentlemen, with the total number of more than 54 million confirmed cases and more than 1.3 million deaths as of 16th November 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us that our global healthcare systems are really vulnerable. The World Bank predicted that the global economy will shrink by 5.2% this year. while the per capita incomes are expected to decline by 3.6%, which will tip millions of people into extreme poverty. In addition, the International Labour Organization estimates that 25 million people could become unemployed, and workers could lose an estimated $3 to $4 trillion in income. In general, the regional growth in the Asia Pacific is projected to slow sharply in 2020 to 0.5%, which will be the lowest rate since 1967. In response to this complex situation, Parliament, as the pillar of democracy representing the will of the people, must work harder in order to pass laws, advance budgets, advocacy for SDGs, and represent the will of the people, as well as hold the government accountable for its action towards the advancement and the achievement of SDGs. More than that, political will is another significant key to effectively mobilize and scale up our resources as it conveys the commitment to fast-track SDGs in the middle of a large-scale crisis like in the COVID-19 pandemic. This situation is a situation where political leaders are required to adopt policies such as committing extremely large emergency management funds. To conclude, this time is not about making a choice between COVID-19 response or the 2030 agenda, but this all should go together. The COVID-19 crisis illustrates our collective vulnerability and highlight the collective benefits for strengthening all countries' resilience to pandemics. Through shared responsibilities and global solidarity, I believe we can recover better and build a more resilient world, not only to beat the virus, but also to tackle its profound consequences. Last but not least, I would like to inform you that next year, the Indonesian House of Representatives will be hosting the first global parliamentary meeting on achieving the SDGs, which will be in cooperation with the IPU. As part of our commitment and support toward the achievement of SDGs in the world through highlighting the roles of parliaments. Besides that, we will also conduct the SDGs self-assessment, which aim at finding the parts which need improvement and the priorities for future actions and recommendations to move forward. Hopefully, by this event, we could find many insights to support the succeed of those aforementioned agenda. Now, I wish all of you, a fruitful discussion and hope that this meeting will yield another important step towards the achievement of the SDGs. And my last comments for all of you, please stay safe and stay healthy amidst this COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Pak Charles Honoris. Pak Charles is also the chair of the Task Force on International Organizations. For the second opening remark, we will hear from the Secretary General of the Interparliamentary Union, Honorable Mr. Martin Chungong, who is joining us all the way from Geneva.
To learn more about the SDG self-assessment exercise, and I am pleased that the prime mover of that self-assessment exercise is here with us today, the Honorary President of the IPU, Saber Chowdhury, and I hope that he will use this opportunity to explain to you the vision he had when he articulated the need for self-assessment. We will look at how the Indonesian Parliament can assess its own current level of engagement with the SDGs and identify the most suitable path to strengthen its action in this area. I look forward to open, frank, and constructive discussions over the next 2 hours and wish you a very successful webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Look forward to seeing you again in coming IPU Assembly in Geneva, hopefully not in a virtual meeting. Honorable members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, time for us to listen to presentation by speakers and followed by discussions. My colleague, Mas Ito, will take my place and moderate the discussion. Ito, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon from Indonesia. Thank you, Ibu Enda, for the opportunity. Good morning in Geneva and good morning as well in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning on the information webinar on the Sustainable Development Goals and the role of parliaments in SDGs implementation in Indonesia, entitled Challenges and Opportunities for Achieving SDGs in the Middle of Pandemic Today. As mentioned earlier by Mrs. Enda, this event is initiated by the Committee for Interparliamentary Cooperations of the House of Representatives of the Republic of Indonesia in cooperation with the Interparliamentary Union or IPU. My name is Mashita Anissa, and I'm an expert staff at the Committee for Interparliamentary Cooperations of the House of Representatives of the Republic of Indonesia, and today I serve as the moderator in this webinar. A brief refreshment or introductions about what we are going to do today. So first of all, 5 years into the implementations of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, progress had been uneven and acceleration was needed, extremely needed in this pandemic time in many areas. When the world leaders adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in 2015, they committed to a shared vision to see the world on a sustainable path for people, planet, peace, partnership, and prosperity. This document as well highlights the important role of parliaments, as mentioned earlier by the Secretary General of the IPU, on the role of parliaments in advancing the attainment of SDGs through lawmaking, budgeting, and oversight functions, because as we already aware that parliaments are at the heart of SDGs. Unfortunately, in only a brief period of time, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted every effort spent by many countries in the world to achieve the 2030 Agenda for SDGs, bringing impacts not only at the goal 3, which is good health and well-being, but also almost all goals as published by the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs report in August 2020, which found that pandemic has overwhelmed health systems globally, kept up to 90% of students out of school, caused businesses and factories to shut down, disrupted global value chains and supply of products, and expected to push more than 71 million people back into the very extreme poverty and cause more than 130 million people to suffer from undernourishment in 2020. And these situations, IPU has been very active in supporting all members of the IPU, which is 179 member parliaments, in their progress to the attainment of SDGs through direct assistance and policy guidance. And in this COVID or pandemic moment, Indonesia and IPU have been actively engaging with so many webinar and also information sharing and also online meetings in discussing about the challenges and opportunities for achieving SDGs. So this is the goal of our webinar today. We will try to capture all opportunities and challenges which country is facing. Especially we will highlight the role of parliaments through the budgeting, lawmaking and oversight functions in achieving SDGs in the middle of pandemic. And today we are very glad to have with us our distinguished speakers who are in the midst of other commitments and activities that they may have. They spend time and energy to share views and experiences in this regard. We believe this is a time where unity, solidarity and international cooperation is needed to form an effective response toward the COVID-19 pandemic. So without further ado, for the first term, before we go to the discussions, allow me to give a brief information about the discussion turn. We will divide into two terms. The first, there will be a presentation from our panelists, from Mr. Agustaviano Sofian, the Director for Development, Economic and Environmental Affairs, Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then followed by Ibu Mrs. Juliati Ansiasopachua, PhD, the UNDP Indonesia SDGs advisor, and we will begin the Q&A session afterwards. And we will have our discussant as well today in this first term, Ibu Irene Yusiana Roba. She is the member of Commission 10, overseeing education, youth, sport, and creative economy. And then for the second term, we will have as well another discussions, and the panelists will be first Honorable Mr. Sabre Chowdhury. He is the Honorary IPU President and also Member of Parliament of Bangladesh. And then followed by the presentation from Ms. Alexandra Blagojevic. She is the IPU Program Manager for International Development, and the discussant will be Ibu Diah Roro Esti, member of the Committee 7, overseeing energy research and technology, and then Ibu Luluk Nur Hamida, member of the Committee 4, overseeing agriculture, environment, and forestry. So now, without further ado, I would like to invite Bapak Mr. Agustaviano Sofian, Director for Development, Economic and Environmental Affairs, Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to share his thought and views about the challenges that countries are facing, especially with regard to the 17 goals. And we see that the impact is not only in the health sector, but we see the impact is also in the climate actions, which is the goal 13, like as well in the 15, life on land, and then life below water, responsible consumption and production, in which we can say that most of the goals are being severely impacted by the pandemic. So please, Mr. Agustaviano Sofian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Mashita, as moderator. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good afternoon and good morning. Before I begin, let me perhaps greet to the distinguished and honorable members of Parliament, Bapak Charles Honoris as Vice Chair of Indonesia's Committee for Interparliamentary Cooperation, and also the Secretary General of IPU, Mr. Martin Chungong, and also Mr. Haber Chowdhury, Honorary of IPU President, Ms. Alexandra Blagojevic, IPU Program Manager, and also my good friend Ibu Ansha, and certainly the honorable members of Indonesian parliaments, and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it is a great honor for me to be invited in this very important topic, where we see the role of Parliament can certainly play its role in trying to move forward with the achievement of SDGs. I think I could say that the presentation, the remarks made by the Honorable Mr. Charles Honoris and also the Secretary General of IPU gave a very nice overview of how Parliament plays this important role. I have prepared a presentation, and I was told that the committee will help assist me in displaying my presentation. I was also told that I've been given around 10 minutes, so I'll try to be very concise and brief in my presentation. Okay, we can go to the first slide, please. Can we go to the first slide, please? Okay, first slide. The first slide, can we go to the first slide? No, the first slide. The first slide actually is looking at the reality check. As we all know that COVID-19 has caused alarming and shock to all countries, that we did not expect this to happen. Not only that we are facing with emergency health crisis, but also its impact to economic and social aspects. So Mr. Charles Honoris and also the Secretary General have also explained how these COVID-19 has affected the achievement of SDGs, and we know that with the data that have been supplied by a number of institutions, that in Asia Pacific alone, that it is estimated between 90 to 400 million people are threatened to be pushed back into poverty. And also by this year also the world global growth will be in the negative territory. The World Bank has estimated will be in minus 5.2, and also an economic loss of roughly $2 trillion US. So, and also there will be almost 500 million jobs will be also lost in this time of crisis. So this is the reality check. So this is a multi-crisis that we are facing. Next slide, please. We know that before COVID-19, the progress of SDG has also been uneven. And with this crisis that we are facing with COVID-19, this will also affect, and this will alter the achievement of SDGs. And certainly with these conditions, it is in everybody's interest and role to play part in trying to alter this continuation of the effect of COVID-19. And certainly the role of the Parliament and also other stakeholders play an important role. I will explain later on, because first I want to look at the global picture first. Then after that, I will tend to see at how Indonesia is also progressing. Now, we all know about the SDGs with the 17 goals and 169 targets. And with this COVID-19, what it tells us that all of these goals are all closely interlinked. So can we go to the next slide, please? Yes. We can see that how all of the 70 goals are interlinked. I cannot go through each one of the 17 goals. It will take a lot of time, but I will just run through a number of important goals. Now, if we know that goal 3 is related to health. Now, if we are not tackling, if we cannot achieve in tackling the goal 3 for health, then it will also affect on goal 1, on the poverty. And it will continue to have loss of income of the people. Also families tend to fall below poverty line and so on. And also goal 4, when number of schools has to be closed, but we also know some schools are using with digitalization, with IT, to use Zoom and also the other media in trying to communicate. But there's also the fact that not all schools are equipped with all these technology, and we also know in remote areas that may not have the sufficient adequate infrastructure. So these are all challenges that we are also facing in this time of crisis that has effect on the other goals in SDGs. So goal 3 on health can affect all of the other goals in SDGs. Can we go to the next slide, please? This also is the case for goal 10 on reduce inequalities. We all know that when everybody is less in their work, and everybody tend to be with loss of jobs, and also this will create the inequalities that tend to have, and this the data that has been shown by international organization does tend to see this is alarming. And we know that has what the Secretary General have already explained, also Ibu Enda earlier in her remarks, saying that now SDGs, we only have 10 years to come, and from 2020 to 2030, it will be the decade of action. So we need actions to move forward with our goals. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I will try to be very quick in my presentation so that, okay. So we see that there are 6 entry points for achieving SDGs in face of the pandemic. First, we can see the strengthening of human well-being and capabilities. Now, this is more on looking of the people-centered. we have to see people first, So we need to empower people. That's why in fighting the COVID-19, the Indonesian slogan, such as the "Ingat Pesan Ibu," so which means like remember mom's message with the 3M, wearing masks, also washing our hands, also physical distancing. So these are, efforts in trying to strengthen human well-being with all these looking at the people-centered. Then shifting towards sustainable and just economies. Certainly, we have to see the three dimensions of sustainable development: the economic aspect, the social aspect, and also the environment, and also building sustainable system. Certainly, this is related on for food security, and then we have achieving energy. And energy, I think Member of Parliament Ibu Roro knows very well when talking about energy, the importance of renewable energy that Indonesia is trying to move forward with the 23% target by 2025. So these are also entry points that we should try to use this opportunity of the pandemic in trying to move ahead with the issues, with the goals that we want to achieve. And also promoting sustainable urban and peri-urban development. Of course, this is how we want to harmonize between the urban and the rural development. And also, last but not least, we want to securing the global environment commons. How we see that we need to continue with efforts in trying to manage our ecosystem. We know that the important environmental meetings such as climate change, then biodiversity, has to be cancelled this year, but it will be continued and be held next year. And the momentum that we are reaching to that goals is very high at the moment, because there are a number of important meetings preparing for these goals and meetings. Next slide, please. Now going to Indonesia, our president, the Indonesian president, at the last UNGA, United Nations General Assembly, and which he stated, so it was the very first time the UN General Assembly held its virtual meeting, and one of the president remarks stated that we must seize this momentum of COVID-19 pandemic to consolidate and to further accelerate and transform Indonesia's development plans. So I know that in this time of circumstances, we have already postponed a lot of meetings. We have already postponed that number of international meetings, as I said earlier. But that doesn't mean that we cannot be productive. That doesn't mean that we cannot go backwards. But we need even to consolidate and to accelerate and transform Indonesia's development plans forward. So that was one of the message by the president. If we can go to the next slide, please. And when I see this slide, I'm also, very encouraging to see that SDGs is mainstream into Indonesia's development agenda. As we all know that the Indonesia's 5-year plan, or we call it the RPGM, has mainstream very clearly for SDGs. If we read clearly in RPGM, or our midterm development plan for 2020 to 2024, we can see that how SDGs is mainstream to this plan. Okay. Next slide, please. Can we go to next slide? Next slide, please. Okay. Okay. This is just one of the issues that I want to point out, that since 2018, that Bappenas has already launched what we call the low carbon development initiative, meaning that we believe that we do need to reduce our gas emission with a low carbon development path, but we also believe that we still need to have our development to a positive growth. So with this chart, basically what it means that we can have, an ambitious to continue with progress of reducing our emission, but in the same time we have to continue with our development growth at a positive. And this shows if we continue with our low carbon development path, it will also enhance our economic growth, our development growth, as investment of energy, investments of green energy at the current moment is even now, that are very potentials and very, very investors right now are looking more on the green investment. If we go to the next slide, please. Now, going to Indonesia again, I'd like to also inform to all the participants and members of parliament from Indonesia, and also from the second gender, and also from in Dhaka. Indonesia has been elected to be a member of the ECOSOC, or the UN Economic and Social Council, in the period 2021 to 2023. Certainly, we are going to play and contribute, very actively in this council, and we have always believed that in this multilateral cooperation, Indonesia does not only that we want to use this opportunity to build ourselves, to learn the experience from others, but we can also contribute in this kind of forums, and contribute and giving best practices to other countries. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please?
Excuse me, Pak Gustaviano, I'm afraid we are out of time, so maybe we can make it
okay.
quicker.
All right, I'll give 2 minutes. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for reminding. So there's a number of focus that we want to have in our membership of ECOSOC, creative economy, innovative financing on SDGs, sharing of best practices in digitalization, taxation, and improve first response humanitarian assistance. Next slide, please. And that's why we want to build back better. Okay. Okay, and this slide shows the very active role by the Indonesian Parliament, and I was also very happy to be involved in trying to work together with the Indonesian Parliament in preparing this World Parliament Forum on Sustainable Development. I believe it started from 2017, 18, and 19. Okay, next slide. This would be the next slide, please. This is the conclusion. So again, this is an opportunity. We know that this pandemic has created a challenge for us, for all the community, for all the world. But there is also opportunity that we can build back better and stronger with using SDGs as the framework of recovery. Okay, that's the first message. And secondly, that Indonesia continues to see that with the multilateral collaboration, with the multilateral collaboration with among countries globally and regionally, we can work together as one and trying to move forward with SDGs. And certainly, Parliament can play a strategic role in recovery and building back better, and that has been alluded before by the guest speakers, that with the role of lawmaking and budgeting, certainly the Parliament plays an important role in moving forward, in trying to push all the stakeholders to achieving the sustainable goals that we all want to achieve and dear for the betterment for our people and for the world. Thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you once again. Indonesia has been implementing the SDGs and on track with the SDGs implementation. Now for the second presentation, we will be hearing a presentation from Mrs. Juliati Anse Sopachua, PhD. She is the UNDP Indonesia SDGs advisor. As we know that UNDP has also been very active in cooperation also with Indonesian House of Representatives in ensuring the SDGs implementation in this country. So Mrs. Juliati, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Before I start, I would like to, first of all, thank you for the invitation. This is my second time to talk to BKSAP and members of parliaments. And I have to say that at UNDP we are very impressed actually with Indonesian parliaments, with their commitment, with their progress, with their initiative in terms of making sure and playing their role in the implementation of SDG in Indonesia. We do know that Indonesia is one of the countries that have made a lot of progress, and that is within the architecture of SDG, its goals, many aspects, financing, and others. Although, of course, especially because of the pandemic, we need to be regroup and reset many of the things we're doing as the country. And today I would like to use some of the report we have internationally, but also share what 3 things I think that we need to be focused on moving forward, so that we can accelerate the process. I would like to also greet Excellency Charles Honoris as the Vice Chairman of Committee of Inter-Parliamentary Cooperation, Mr. Martin Chung, Secretary General of Inter-Parliamentary Union, the fellow speakers, my friend Pak Agus, and other speakers, members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, Bapak Ibu sekalian, selamat sore. I would like to share my presentation, and I think I have about 10 minutes. Can everybody see my presentation now? Yeah? Okay. All right. So yeah, we hear from Pak Charles, Pak Agus. We hear about this ambitious agenda with 17 goals and how it's interlinked. We also know how Indonesia with PEPRES, with overarching policy, with guidelines, with many things as enabler that has been done, led by Bappenas and other ministries that allow Indonesia to be where they are at right now in terms of adopting and implementing SDGs. We are proud to be part in UNDP network, to be with Indonesian country office that where Indonesia is praised in international stage, and both at regional specific as well as at global level. And I think some of the colleagues from Parliament was also part of HLPF 2019, and we have seen how Indonesia with VNR was shining actually at that meeting. However, we all in the middle of pandemic, and I would like to use this Sustainable Development Report 2020 to see and use this as a reference for us to see how we're at, how pandemic can reset all our work, and then again talking about how to accelerate the process of implementation. Now, we all know that COVID-19 have negative impact, and as the goals are interlinked, obviously we will see basically all development agenda being impacted, but I will probably focus on the 5 main goals, 1, 2, 3, 8, and 10. And therefore collaboration and international solidarity is critically needed the report, and this is, again, I use the report as the reference, but we all know that lack of reliable data and infrequent formal statistic and survey doesn't allow us to follow the achievement as quick as we want, and therefore require investment to increase capacity of statistics, but also coordination between private sector and government. Okay, so we have heard from a couple of people how impact of COVID-19, but yeah, so there are 400 million at least. We are still in the middle of pandemic, so this is going to change to worse, I think. I mean, in Europe now, it's in the United States, it's believed to be in a second wave. So these are a huge number that come from those countries. So for India, it depends who you're looking at or which report. It's about 26 million people that fall into poverty. So the poverty rate might, we were 1 digit, we might go back to 2 digits now. Let's just pick some, not all, but okay, for I like number 2. It's because food insecurity, in Indonesia, it's almost 20 million people. Globally, WFP says it's more than 270 million. We, as of today, we have 15,500 deaths. It's relatively small compared to other countries, obviously. United States is like some million, but still. So these are numbers that we can see, and plus, again, when you look at how interlinked these goals are, we can see that some can, perpetuate the impact, the situation of the goals. And now 14 and 15, with the use of mask, and because we're in the middle of pandemic, we would expect that a lot of waste management is not necessarily managed in the way we want to do it. So we are expecting a lot, and we are afraid that there will be a lot of masks in Teluk Jakarta soon. So these are all very very critical for us. Let's see. Yeah. So really quick with this SDG Index 2020, for your reference, Indonesia is number 101 of 169 countries. If you look at the trends here, we are pretty good. I mean, yeah, could be better. But the point here being is that this trend will change. Like no poverty, we're pretty good. We are on track, or at least maintaining SDG achievement. This is going to change, right? Then number 2, number 3, number 10 is there's no data so far, but number 8 is pretty good as well. But these are all going to change in the coming year, or at least next year, and so we have to regroup that. Now, so the question is, how do we do that? And in 2019, the VNR, Indonesia VNR, I mean, the numbers are really good, and progress was very impressive. But as we are facing the impact, I would like to offer 3 things to talk about, the critical points to accelerate achievement. So we have all the achievement. Now what we need to be having so that we can accelerate. The first one is high capacity of all stakeholders. This is important. This is critical. For us, UNDP, we think that capacity of all stakeholders, of parliamentarians, of executive, NGO, private sector, philanthropy, everybody, we have to have a high capacity so that we, because capacity is critical enabler for us. I mean, you can learn, but you can learn and then you can be creative. That's probably the theory of change there. Knowledge, not only knowledge, leadership, innovation is needed so that we can move forward. And innovation in all kinds of aspects. The first one is high capacity. The second one is obviously adequate financing. I have the numbers here from Bapenas. To 2030, it's 600, almost 700 billion US dollar is needed, and this target, these numbers is generated before pandemic. So one would assume, we can assume that it might be more now. And achieving SDG obviously needs a huge number of funds, money, and therefore being innovative to find innovative source of financing. Focus, I mean, Indonesia, because we are mid-income country with a lot of potential domestically. We should find ways to, and Islamic finance obviously huge, but there are other things that need to be done so that we can not only get that money, but ensure effective spending of that funds in terms of even domestic or foreign aid, so that we can catch up with implementation of SDGs. The third one is innovation. Innovation, business as usual. I have somebody mentioned this before, but business as usual will not cut it anymore. Innovation is the most critical enabler. So if we, so far it doesn't work, we really have to change. In UNDP, it is the most important enabler for us. It's within our DNA. We need to try different things, try fast, and try with innovation. And innovation.
You can wrap up the discussion because
okay.
I'm afraid the time is
thank you. Okay. And then these are a couple of examples from UNDP in terms of COVID, working with the government of Indonesia in response to COVID, and this is part of international solidarity. But in terms of innovation, just really quick, so I have capacity, I have financing, yeah. I shared this before, like we have SDG Academy Indonesia that offer courses, blended courses. We also have innovative finance lab that look at various source funds innovatively, and different platform social innovation to look for how we move forward with SDG. Role of Parliament, I have to have this because we're talking to parliamentarians, lawmaking, oversight, and representation. But within all of that, I've seen that parliamentarians in Indonesia have done so much. So I don't have to explain this to you. But my one last point is that within all of that, again, we appreciate your role so far, and we just want to encourage even more moving forward, as now is more than ever for you to do that. With that, I stop there. Thank you for the opportunity, and I back to you, moderator. Thank you.
Joe, for the very interesting and also refreshing as well, and also insightful talks about the role of UNDP on advancing SDGs, especially in the case of Indonesia. And now, before we proceed to the second term, we will be hearing a response by the discussant. We will have Ibu Irina Yusiana Roba. She is the member of the Committee 10 overseeing education, youth, sport, and creative economy, as well as the member of the Committee for Interparliamentary Cooperations of the Indonesian House of Representatives. So, Ibu Irina Yusiana, so time is yours.
Okay, Thank you, Ibu Moderator, and also thank you for all the speakers for the enlightenment on SDGs. However, in my second term on the House, I'm still wondering every time I attend a meeting or even like this regarding on how we can really implement SDGs in our job as MPs. Two short questions for me. First is, how do you recommend about the most effective way to ensure that all MPs are well aware about SDGs so that we all can perform our legislative function effectively in guiding the implementation and achievement of SDGs in the country. Second, effort to localize the SDGs are important so that people feel that the 2030 agenda is relevant to their life. Relevance to people everyday life is important to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs goals. What is the role of Parliament in translating the universal goals of SDGs into the local context? Is there any success story among us all in implement SDGs in their duty as MPs so we can learn from it and know where to start, especially for the young and new MP? Thank you.
Triggering questions because most of us maybe are facing the difficulties on how to translate the global goal into the national commitment. To respond to these questions, I would like to kindly invite Bapak Agustaviano and Ibu Juliati to respond to the inquiry from Ibu Irina. Please, Pak Agustaviano or Ibu Ansya, maybe you would like to respond to the question from Ibu Irina?
Sure. Thank you.
With the 2 minutes
Go
only.
ahead.
You want to go first?
Ansya, maybe you want to respond to
okay,
the question
sure.
from Ibu Irina?
Sure, I'll go first. Thank you. Thank you for the question. I mean, that's I will go with the localization first. Localization is very important, and in Indonesia, a lot of efforts have been done with the purpose. It goes down to then to provinces and districts where people have their local action plan, their that, and then aligned with their RPJMD and all these processes that goes planning and budgeting and all. So I think this is obviously very relevant with the role of parliaments, and like I have here law making, oversight and representation. That is your role, and so accountability of the agenda in the easiest way to think about this is that it's global goal, but it's translating and it's mainstreaming into RPJMD or any, and that is district or province or national. So your role in ensuring accountability of that agenda is very critical. Do we have a committee of oversight specific or of mechanism that is within Parliament to make sure that what's being decided as the priority, is it being implemented in an effective way, efficient way? Is it targeting the vulnerable groups? In terms of planning and lawmaking, is it are people being invited in the process? Some of these examples that I think we need to bring somebody who have the experience, and when we do work with, for example, in Riau. But promoting SDG is one of the things that parliamentarians can do. For example, look at, say there is a draft law, say there is a draft law. Is there any way that the parliamentarian secretariat can have an impact analysis that look at how this law is going to impacting positive or negatively SDGs? That is one thing that we can do. Identifying priorities, if this is in place, are we actually trying to answer and tackle the most important issue we are facing right now? So this is what I can share in terms of localizing. in terms of how localizing and how important it is for people, this is a very important point as well. And I want to point out to what Kementerian Desa is now just do. So Menteri Desa just issue a peraturan menteri that says all the village funds need to, they're working with UNDP, this is how I know it, but village fund have to answer or have to implement and to answer contributing to SDG. And so we are trying to make it you know, as tangible and as easy to understand, but I think we appreciate what Kementerian Desa is doing, and for Bapak Ibu parliamentarians to probably using your role again, oversight and making sure that the funds that is disbursed is used for the most vulnerable people. I'll stop there for now and see. And Agus, silakan.
Yes, thank you.
I'll try
Agus,
to.
please.
Yeah. Thank you, moderator. I'll try to be very brief, and thank you, Ibu Irene, for the question. And I like the question. I very much appreciate it. Now, for the first question, you know, what kind of role for Parliament, particularly young member of Parliament, as you mentioned. Now we all know that the one of the big challenge for implementing SDGs is there's a financing gap, and this financing gap tends to be one of the barriers, and we need to find ways in trying to move this forward. Now that's why, as role of Parliament for lawmaking and budgeting, perhaps it would be good, and for issues of SDGs, my portfolio in my office, I also coordinate with Bappenas. It would also be good if there could be some kind of a budget tagging for at the national and sub-national level for budget tagging, if they want to plan, you know, their activities for the next year. You know, they need to have what are, you know, need to have a budget tagging for SDGs goals and targets. So I think this is something concrete that a member of Parliament could assist in, to have a budget tagging, whether it's at the national level for the ministries or KL, you know, ministries and other institutions, and or at the sub-national levels. So budget tagging, I think, would be important to accelerate and upscale activities of SDGs. Second, on you know, the other roles, particularly at the local, I would like to suggest, Ibu Rina, to perhaps the members of Parliament could have like a give an award or incentive for local authorities that have championed SDGs. So some kind of a award by Parliament for the Indonesia DPR for local authorities that are championing SDGs. So, you know, those kind of you know, awards that can be made to make the local authorities and local all parts of Indonesia to encourage more on implementations of SDGs. Thank you.
And Ibu Ansha for the initiatives for giving award for those local institutions who can champion the achievement of SDGs, because most of all we believe that localizing SDG is the critical point on how we can translate the so-called the global goals into the national and later into the local commitments. And now we will begin the second term of the discussion. Here we will have two panelists. The first we will have Honorable Mr. Saber Chowdhury. He is the Honorary IPU President and also Member of Parliament of Bangladesh. And also at the second session, we will have Mrs. Alexandra Blagojevic, the IPU Program Manager for International Development. So a brief introduction for Mr. Saber. Mr. Saber has an extensive experience in IPU, and also he is the 2018 President of the IPU. He graduated from the University of London, or SOAS, and studied economics and politics. And he has also pioneered community initiatives on issues such as healthcare, tobacco control, youth empowerment, self-employment, and also women support and legal aid. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite Honorable Mr. Saber Chaudhuri for giving a presentation and also share his thought about the challenges and opportunities to the attainment of SDGs. So please, Mr. Saber, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and I also would like to thank the House of Representatives of Indonesia for this very timely initiative. Also to the IPU for coming forward at a time when the SDGs themselves are facing many challenges. I have a presentation which my office will put on the screen. But let me first very briefly respond to a question from Martin, the Honorable Secretary General of the IPU, as to why we had the toolkit. And because I was involved in that process. And if I may just very briefly say, you see, democracy must deliver. Democracy must make a difference to the lives of the people. And the extent to which it is able to do that depends on the institutions that underpin democracy. And Parliament, of course, is one of those most important institutions. So how we as individual parliamentarians and how the institution of Parliament delivers to the people as per their expectations is very, very important. That is why we came up with the idea of a toolkit. And you know, in today's world, there is so much that is being pushed in terms of agenda to parliamentarians. We have the international dimension, we have our national politics, we have our constituency obligations. So what needs to be done is amply very clear. You know, even today we are saying what is the role of the Parliament. But then if we ask the question, how is that role going to be performed? You know, that is the real challenge. And when we go into how, you have to look at capacity. You have to look at knowledge. You have to look at understanding the issues. So the toolkit, I think, is very important because it helps us as parliamentarians to guide us through. It is a checklist to see where we are. Martin mentioned the phrase fit for purpose. So to what extent are we equipped as parliamentarians individually? And to what extent is the institution of Parliament in a position to deliver on the expectations of the people? So that's why we had a self-assessment toolkit. And I think it is right that we ourselves as parliamentarians should be benchmarking our own capacities and our own capabilities. So, and I'm very glad that we have someone like Alexandra today. She's an excellent resource person and she can guide you through this toolkit. So I think that'll be very useful. I don't want to preempt that. I just wanted to give a little bit of background information as to why the IPU went into this initiative. And I think it's an extremely worthwhile document. I would encourage everyone to go through that toolkit, do your benchmarking, identify where you need to pay more attention, identify where we can develop our capacities more. So this self-assessment is going to be very, very important. So the first point that I will start with today, if you look at the title, there are really two parts. One is how parliaments are engaging with SDGs, and the other is the challenges and opportunities that the COVID has actually brought up. I know, you know, the devastation that COVID has caused in terms of losses of lives, in terms of livelihoods being ruined, and we are talking about challenge and opportunities out of something which has been so devastating and continues to be so. But then that is a reality. I mean, if we look at, you know, I was thinking of the tsunami of 2004 in Indonesia and other parts of the region. Almost 50 countries affected, close to 230,000 lives lost. And what that did was that sent a very clear message to the world that we have to think about prevention. We have to think about early warning systems. We have to understand the risk. And if you remember, right after that, we had the Hyogo Framework of Action from 2005 to 2015. So hopefully the COVID, bad as it is, you know, as we all wish it never happened, but it will also hopefully get us into doing something, learning from COVID, and how can we then merge the two agendas. So the first point that I'm going to talk about in terms of parliamentary engagement, I will start with the last goal of the 17 goals, which is goal 17. And that is the goal of partnership. So if you look at it, you know, the 17th goal is that of partnership. The slide should come up. Okay, the next slide, please. So partnerships is not just about what is happening globally. To me, the most important partnership is that between the governments and the parliaments. Because, you know, we do not simply have the resources to have access to data. We don't know what is going on in various parts of the government. So the very important partnership that I will talk about is that between the government and the parliament. Of course, when you're talking about a very ambitious a transformational agenda as the SDGs, it has to be a whole of government, a whole of society. So everybody has to be involved. The private sector, the community organizations, the NGOs, the academia, you know, everyone has to be involved in this. But I think the one is partnerships and in terms of the government and the parliament. And this has actually made our job in the parliament of Bangladesh much more easier to engage in the SDG agenda. So Bangladesh, if you remember, has performed well when it comes to the MDGs. So for us to move from MDGs to SDGs was not a very difficult task. And the timing of the SDGs was also such that it coincided, in fact, with our national development plan. We have 5-year plans. And so the plan from 2016 to 2020 actually aligned itself completely with the SDGs. And if I don't want to go through all of them, but in terms of number of goals, 14 of them were actually aligned fully and 3 were partly aligned. So if you look at the next slide, what the government of Bangladesh did was there was a mapping of all of the targets. So, you know, the 17 goals, the 169 targets, the 244 indicators, these were each assigned to a ministry. And in Bangladesh, what we have the parliamentary standing committees that are aligned to the ministries. I, for example, chair currently the Committee on Environment, Climate Change, and Forest. So I have targets that I look at. So all of these targets have actually been aligned to each of the ministries. And then the parliamentary standing committees are actually looking at the targets and see to what extent we are performing. So this mapping by the government has been a huge boost for us, has been a huge boon for us, because we don't have the resources. Now we know exactly which ministry is responsible for which SDG goal, which target, which indicator. And it is not just a question of tracking and monitoring. We also, when we allocate our budgetary heads, we actually look at the SDGs. So we say, okay, target 1 on poverty, what are we doing? What are the actions that we are taking in the budget? One of the speakers just before this session was talking about budgetary mapping and tracking, you know, how much of the budget is allocated to what SDG. So we actually do that in the context of Bangladesh, which is very important. The other very important part that we have, if you look at the next slide, you see we have data which is generated and disaggregated. So if you are a parliamentarian, what are your most important responsibilities? The first is you want to make your choices, you want to take your decisions on the basis of data. So informed decision making, absolutely vital. You must know, and the data will tell you, the data will benchmark, the data will tell you what is the year-to-year progress. And then once you have the data, you can target your resource allocation. So this is very important. Data being generated, disaggregated. Next is it helps you to benchmark. And the third, you then know how to target your financial resources. How do I know how much more money to allocate for healthcare? How do I know how much more money to allocate for education? So this, I think, is very, very important. How do I know whether inequality in terms of income, in terms of wealth, in terms of opportunities, is that actually increasing, or are we reducing the inequality? So this for us has been a tremendous advantage. And even during the pandemic, which is the next point that I want to go to, I'm conscious of the time. So if you look at the next slide, the one after, so you have all of these documents that we actually look at. I'm just giving you the front page. I'm not going into the detail. Plus, the other thing which has been mentioned here is the voluntary national review. Parliaments have to be engaged in that. It is not just what governments are going to present to the UN to look good. We need to scrutinize. We need to say that, yes, we have achieved here, we have not achieved here. So Parliament has also been very closely involved in that aspect. So the next, we then look into the nexus between the SDGs and COVID. And I know we have talked about it, there have been many slides. So if you go to the next slide, this is a very good slide, which I would encourage the House of Representatives to circulate, because it actually shows you the impact of the pandemic on all of the goals of the Sustainable Development, the Agenda 2030. I will not go into that because that has been brought in already in the presentations. What I will go to is the next slide, because this is something very interesting. And it is a motion that we adopted in the Parliament of Bangladesh, declaring a planetary emergency. Now, this was done before COVID. You can see this was done in November 2019, before the Santiago COP, which was then moved to Madrid. And if you look at what we actually talk about there, we talk about climate change, we talk about the impact of disasters, we talk about the loss of biodiversity, we talk about the food insecurity, we talk about water stress, we talk about the pressure on oceans, and the unsustainable use of resources. So this was actually taken before that. And then we talk about, how we are going to achieve those goals. Now, a lot of parliaments have declared a climate emergency. Bangladesh is the only parliament to have declared a planetary emergency, because all of the crises are actually coming together. So if I just give you an example of the unsustainable use of resources, it is going to take 2.5 Earths, 2.5 planet Earth, to meet the requirements of our current generation. So every year, what we are supposed to spend over 12 months, we're actually spending in 6 to 7 months. We call it planetary overshoot. So this I'm saying, because this is a very important hook that we have. When we look at parliamentary engagement, you're looking at areas that allow you to enter into the domain of the executive, to challenge the executive, to perform oversight, to say that, hey, this is something that you should be doing better. So once the House adopts a unanimous motion where the Prime Minister is present, the opposition is present, and I mentioned unanimous because it was also the opposition that came in. When you talk about parliamentary action, the SDGs is not a political agenda. It is a national agenda. It is for all of the parties. So you must have cross-party consensus when you're approaching this issue. And that is what we have done over here. And throughout the COVID, if you look at what has happened, we have talked about the economic loss. Remember, the SDGs, even before the COVID, had two fundamental challenges. One is the fact that we were underperforming. Most of the countries, even the developed countries, were not on track to meet the SDG goals. Plus, you have a financing gap of close to $2.5 trillion every year it's going to take. Now, if I look at what is happening in Bangladesh because of COVID, the impact of COVID just in this financial year is $20 billion. $20 billion just for Bangladesh. I don't know what it is for Indonesia, but if you look globally, it is going to be estimated various figures, but $8 to $10 trillion. So you have a SDG financing gap. You also have this additional cost on account of COVID. And if you look at the stimulus, in Bangladesh, we have had to give because of COVID, and this is something that the parliament approved. We have had to give as a stimulus package close to $12 billion, which is 3.6% of our GDP. I'm sure there is also a stimulus package in Indonesia. So think about all of these things. You have this issue, there's a financing gap, you are challenged, you have the additional expenses on account of COVID, and then that brings into question, are we going to just focus on COVID recovery, or are we going to invest in SDGs? I will come to that question, but before I move there, the next slide I want to show you, we talk about what we do as parliamentarians in the parliament, we exercise oversight,
pass budget, we make
we
laws.
are running out of time, so maybe you can
Okay,
like
I'll make it in
shorter.
2 minutes.
Yes, sure.
So
Thank
this
you.
is an example of what I did in my constituency. Health for all is an important part of the SDGs, goal 3. So there is also individual action that we as parliamentarians can take in our own constituencies to in fact address the COVID. Now the last slide I will come to, in fact there are 4 slides. So I call it, and this is my message at the end. Can we go to the 4 R's? Okay, so this slide is, it is not a binary choice. It's not either or. Are we going to respond to COVID or are we going to invest in SDGs? You have to do both. And that is what parliaments have to keep in mind. You respond to COVID by investing in SDGs. This is the best option that you can have. And I'll leave you with what I refer to as the 4 R's, R, the alphabet R. The first R, we have to reimagine development. We have to think what our priorities are. We have to think outside the box. We have to think how we are leading our lives. So that is the first R, reimagine. The second R is we have to rebuild, and it has to be better. It is building back better. This is all related to the challenges and opportunities that the pandemic gives to us. So the first R is reimagine. The second R is rebuild. The third R is recover resiliently. So we must invest in a way that our infrastructure is resilient. Our policies are resilient. And the fourth R is we reclaim the future that we want. So these are my messages. If I put it all together in one slide, the development, the opportunities and challenges, reimagine development, rebuild better, recover resiliently, reclaim the future that we want and the future that the people that we represent deserve. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mr. Chaber, for the very interesting and also insightful presentation, and also sharing about your experience in your constituents on how you are trying to fast track the SDGs despite the pandemic, by stating that you highlight the key that responding to COVID and investing in SDG is not an option, but it should go all together. By responding to COVID, by investing in SDGs, I think this would be a very red point for every parliament who are hearing this talk, so that it can be inspiration for all. Now we would like to hear the second presentation from Ms. Alexandra Blagojevic. So she is the IPU Program Manager for International Development, and she will be explaining us about maybe the technical details about the IPU SDGs toolkit, because Indonesia will be conducting the SDGs assessment hopefully by next year, because we plan to do it by this year, but due to the pandemic and so many restrictions and so many challenges within the SDGs implementation due to the COVID, so we postpone it and we'll do it hopefully by the next year. So Mrs. Alexandra, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much to the Indonesian House of Representatives for this invitation. It is a great pleasure to be here and to present to you the SDG Self-Assessment Toolkit that the IPU and UNDP have produced about 3 years ago. So I hope you can see my screen. In the interest of time, I will go through my slides very quickly. And of course, it has been to speak our President, Mr. Chaudhry, who is really behind a great role in its development. So as Mr. Chaudhry already said, after the SDGs were adopted in 2015, there were 2 things that we asked ourselves at the IPU. The first one was that the realization that the SDGs tell us where we want to be, but they don't tell us how to get there. And the second one, as Mr. Chaudhry pointed out, was whether parliaments have the capacity to respond, to implement the SDGs. In other words, are they fit for purpose? So we decided, because every parliament has its own realities, every country has its own level of development, the way of functioning, the relationship with the government. So for this reason, we decided to go for a product that would not be prescriptive, but that would encourage the finding solutions through a dialogue. So the idea of a self-assessment is to help parliaments identify baselines, strategies, and shared priorities to institutionalize the SDGs and engage in SDG implementation. Ideally, as a result of a self-assessment exercise, a parliament adopts an action plan with timelines, with clear responsibilities, objectives, and so on, which it can then follow up on and evaluate. So in terms of our engagement as the IPU, as this is a self-assessment, of course, every parliament can do this exercise by itself. If needed, and if we are invited, the IPU and UNDP are, of course, happy to help organize the exercise and co-facilitate if needed and as necessary. In the IPU, we also have a standing committee on United Nations affairs that every year organizes a session for parliamentarians to share their experiences with SDG implementation, and a lot of these experiences related to the self-assessment are shared in this context. We also have regional seminars and hopefully the global conference next year where we look at 8 groups of questions. As you see, they all respond to the core roles of Parliament. How do we legislate on SDGs? How do we monitor implementation? How do we build a better understanding? This was also raised in this webinar today. So each group of questions is divided into 2 parts. Part A is usually very short, 3 to 4 questions that can be answered with yes or no. And its purpose is to help the Parliament identify the baseline. Where are we now? What do we have now? Part B are more open-ended questions. And the purpose of those questions is to encourage a dialogue with the idea to define where we go from here, to define the future strategy, where do we want to be? I would just like to show you some examples of parliaments who have done a self-assessment and what it has led to. I will go through these slides again very quickly. Maybe the first one is the Fiji Parliament self-assessment because it was the first one that was done in October 2017. So it was done by all members of parliament. It's a small parliament of about 50 parliamentarians, so they decided to involve everybody. And it was done over a course of 5 days. The IPU and UNDP helped the parliament to facilitate the exercise. One of the main messages of the action plan that the parliament developed was the core function of parliamentary oversight. And that spanned different areas. As a result, which is used by different committees, so it's tailored to the committees and their mandate to oversee the implementation of the SDGs. So this has been a really direct follow-up and very helpful to the parliament as it moves forward on the SDG implementation. The second one I would like to highlight here is the self-assessment of a Serbian parliament, which was done in 2018 by a smaller group of parliamentarians, because in this parliament they have a focus group on the SDGs, which is composed of chairs, deputy chairs of the committees. So this group met, they also did the self-assessment over a few days, and they came up with an action plan. And you can see here some of the issues that they highlighted here. They were particularly concerned with the budget and making sure that budget allocations help meet some of the SDG targets. But what is particularly interesting about the Serbian example is that they used the SDG self-assessment toolkit twice. So they used it again next year in 2019 to evaluate the progress on the action plan that was adopted the year before. And then also the self-assessment, the second self-assessment, help the parliament, help the focus group prepare and submit amendments to the 2020 budget bill, so as to include the SDGs in that budget. The third one is a self-assessment of the Parliament of Georgia, which also produced some very interesting outcomes in terms of an action plan. And that parliament, for instance, they decided that they didn't want to create a separate committee on the SDGs, but they wanted to mainstream the goals in the existing committees. What they did was appoint a member of parliament and a member of staff as focal points for the SDGs in each and every committee, and then create a platform for these focal points to meet and exchange and coordinate the parliamentary work. The self-assessment toolkit the IPU and UNDP, English, French, Spanish, and Arabic, but today it exists in different language versions, Russian, Serbian, Armenian, Portuguese, and we are very happy that very soon we will add the Indonesian version for this collection. So I will stop here and thank you so much again.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Alexandra, for the clear descriptions and also Indonesian House of Representatives has already translated this document because the one published by the IPU was in English, and we already translated into Bahasa Indonesia or Indonesian language, and the document can be found for our honorable member of parliaments. The document can be found in the website of BKSAP so that everyone can be well aware about the issues of SDGs and also especially the assessment toolkit itself. Now, please, I would like to invite Ibu Luluk Nur Hamidah joining us directly from Pulau Komodo, is Nusa Tenggara Timur. Bu Luluk.
Thank you. Yeah.
For Committee Agriculture, Environment, and Forestry. Please, Bu Luluk, time is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, moderators, and to all speakers. Actually, I have some questions to all speakers. The first question is, how do you assess countries, especially developing countries, preparedness about current challenge in terms of social, etc. during COVID-19 pandemics? And the second question, how many member parliament needed to do the self-assessment? And do you think that do you need specific committee in doing this assessment?
Yes.
And the third question, yeah?
Question, maybe can you repeat the first question because I'm afraid it's not clear yet.
Oh, okay, okay. The first question is, how many member parliaments needed to do the self-assessment, and do you need specific committee in doing this assessment? And the second question, how do you assess countries, especially developing countries' preparedness about current challenge in terms of social, economic, health, etc. during COVID-19? And also the third question, during COVID-19, all national priorities are delivery chains. Most of us are focusing on spending, energy, budget allocation, and also other concerns about how to mitigate COVID-19. And I believe that all stakeholders in the country must involve within the process. What do you think about the role of civil society in ensuring the achievement of SDGs during COVID-19 pandemics? Because I worry if this issue is only belong to the government or even the parliaments, but we let the civil society roles. And also the last question, socialization related to SDGs, especially for regional stakeholders, is important as an effort to synchronize national and local policies. So in some case, at the local level, effort to achieve the SDGs have not been running as they would be, where there are areas that have achieved well while others have not. So by the experience of the IPU, which received a lot of reports from various countries, are there any example of countries with a similar conduct for Indonesia, but which are good enough in terms of synchronizing their national and regional policies? Thank you.
Lulu, for the very comprehensive questions, but there are 4 questions, and maybe I would like to address the question for Darling for the question number 3 and number 4 about the role of civil society. I would like to invite Honorable Mr. Saber Chowdhury for responding this question, because I believe you have been involving a lot in civil society engagement in the attainment of SDGs. Maybe Honorable Mr. Saber, you can respond Bu Lulu question in this regard.
Wow.
Honorable Mr. Saber, are you there? Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm afraid we can hear
you hear me?
Yes, it's clear now.
Okay, so my first slide was on partnerships. And, I talked initially about the partnership between the parliament and the government. But it is also a whole of society. It's a whole of government engagement. You see, the SDGs are such an ambitious agenda that it is not possible for the government alone or for the parliament alone to deliver on it. So I think we need to engage civil society. We need to engage everyone in this. So I certainly don't wish to underplay the importance of that. What we have also had in Bangladesh is that the civil society also do their own evaluation on the SDGs, which the parliament has found very useful. And we as parliamentarians, I have been to many of these sessions where they engage with young people, they engage with women. So these voices are then brought to parliamentarians. So if you like, the parliamentarians are acting as a bridge between the people and the government. And hearing the voice of civil society, I think is absolutely critical. You had another question with regard to local government. I think this is where, again, the partnership. So it's not just global, it's not between government and the parliament. It's also between national government and local government. That is absolutely critical. Even if we talk about climate change, we talk about acting globally and, thinking globally, connecting locally. So the local part is very important. So unless the local government institutions are not on board, parliament itself cannot guarantee implementation. Parliament can make the laws. Parliament can appropriate the resources. Parliament can say that this has to be done, but the implementation has to be at a local government level. So unless the alignment, unless the local government institutions are not fully aligned to the SDGs, the implementation at the grassroots level will never take place. And when we talk about implementation, it is not in words, it is in reality. And so it is the local government that does the implementation. Perhaps Alexander can answer on the number of parliamentarians it takes to do a toolkit together.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Also to say that to build a little bit on this, we have had examples of some parliaments that wanted to include civil society and government representatives in the self-assessment. So this is again to highlight this focus on partnerships, and these partnerships at the national level are really key. In terms of, just to answer directly your question about how many parliamentarians, it really depends on the parliament. What is important is that key committees, if not all committees, are represented by the level of chair, deputy chair, as many members as possible. It is also important to involve parliamentary staff that we, of course, know that they also play a very critical role. What is then important to understand is that this exercise needs to be manageable. If you have too many people, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to manage the discussions. So what we try to do in preparation of an SDG self-assessment is to agree with the parliament on how we work together. So normally a parliament establishes a kind of like a steering committee or a group composed of parliamentarians that organize the self-assessment, and then the parliament decides who would be the parliamentarians who participate in the self-assessment. From the IPU, we always recommend to invite men and women, to invite government and opposition. But again, the exact number really depends on the size of parliament and, of course, on different political development.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, and also Honorable Mr. Saber for the response. And before we come up to the end of the meeting, we will still have a question and answer session, and I will open for the last term. We will have a question from our participants, and I think it's not an MP, so he is Mr. Rayhan Abrari. Maybe the operator, you can turn on the camera of Mr. Rayhan so that he can address the question directly to the panelists. Mr. Rehan, can you hear us? Mr. Rehan, can you hear us? Okay, no, okay, so I think it's like connection problem. So I will read the question. So he is asking, on this webinar, I could see that there are many plans that we have prepared during the pandemic, but I'm curious about what the society can do to support these plans to accelerate the progress on achieving SDGs, especially when we know that our deadline is very near, so that how can us, the society, especially the younger generation, can support this goal? Ms. Alexandra or maybe Mr. Shaber, you would like to respond this question about how the youth generation can involve in the process of the attainment of SDGs effectively?
I will let Alexandra come in also. What I will say for my part is, the SDG agenda is really for the youth. And I know the IPU has a very strong focus on young parliamentarians and the youth community, because if we think about Agenda 2030, the real beneficiary are going to be the young people. In Bangladesh also, we have tried to reach out to them, in terms, because this is an agenda of the young for the young, and we want it to be, with the young people. So I think engaging young people, getting them to, in fact, help implement is really, that's why if you look at my last R in my slide, I talked about reclaim the future. So, this focus on the future is very important. And I think young people have to be involved. They must be involved. They must be engaged in the agenda. They must be owning the agenda. And the IPO, I know, looks at it in terms of young people, not as potential leaders of tomorrow, but as leaders of today. So I think that is the change in mindset that we need, to have young people engaging in it, not saying that your time will come, your turn will come. Your time, your turn has already come. This is your time. So own the agenda and claim it for your own futures. Alexandra, if you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you. Just two things on this very quickly. Indeed, in the IPU, we do have a strong focus on young parliamentarians. We have a forum of young parliamentarians, which is an institutional body. We also have a requirement. We have an annual assembly, a biennial assembly every year. So we have a requirement from the delegations attending to include young parliamentarians in the delegation. And because we really see them as a vehicle of progress and also as a source of very many good innovative ideas. And another thing that I would like to highlight here is that indeed in many action plans that have been adopted by parliaments as a result of a self-assessment, we saw this need to communicate with young people. But what we have also seen is that a lot of times parliamentarians are not sure how to exactly to do that. What language do they speak? How do they communicate on the SDGs with the young generation? So I think that type of an exchange could also be good to understand, maybe also from people like you, how a parliament can be more effective in engaging young people.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Alexandra, and also all of the panelists who have been involved in this discussion, especially Mr. Saber for the previous response to the question from the student from Indonesia. So finally, we've come up to the end of the discussion. And from all of the discussion, we found so many interesting points and so many new talks, so many new insights on how this pandemic is actually blessing in disguise, in which we see that the pandemic, through this pandemic, we see the rising of global cooperations on how countries are in cooperation in fighting against this pandemic. However, with only 10 years left toward the achievement of the pandemic, it left us with so many remaining questions on the extent to which countries can accelerate the efforts to the achievement of SDGs. To respond to this question, we believe that political will is extremely needed, especially by the role of parliaments in the budgeting, lawmaking, and also oversight function. And therefore, SDGs should be the compass to recover better from COVID, and Parliament can act as the bridge in ensuring that all stakeholders, all commitment, all national efforts are spent carefully in the effort to the achievement of SDGs. Last, I would like to thank all of the panelists all of the participants for your presence and greet and therefore to join the House of Representatives meetings information webinar today on enhancing parliamentary action to better address the impact of COVID-19 through the achievement of SDGs. And last but not least, I would like to inform you that hopefully by next year, Indonesian Parliament will host the first global parliamentary meeting on achieving the SDGs in cooperation with the IPU as part of our commitment and support toward the achievement of SDGs in the world through highlighting on the role of parliaments. And we will also be the host of the IPU General Assembly in 2020, especially in April. And we will also conduct the SDG self-assessment in next year as well, aim at finding the parts to improve on the priorities for future actions and recommendations for Indonesian Parliament to support the achievement of SDGs. Once again, I would like to thank to Mr. Charles Honoris, Mr. Martin Chungong, Mr. Saber Chowdhury, Ms. Alexandra Blagojevic, Mr. Agustaviano Sofian, and also Ms. Juliati Anser Chopachua, and also all of the honorable member of parliaments of the House of Representatives of the Republic of Indonesia and all of the participants. We hope to see you again in the other webinar from the Indonesian House of Representatives. Thank you.
Thank you.